I was engaged to a nice guy on Friday and married to a mobster by next month. My boss Lorenzo was a nightmare, lethal, cold, and strictly professional. Until I came to work wearing a diamond from another man. The mask slipped. He claimed me right there in his office, fired my fiancé to his face, and decided waiting was over. There was no dating phase. He bought the rings, locked me in his penthouse, and declared me his wife before we even hit the altar.
Let us open the case file together, you and I. The camera fades in on Lorenzo Duca's office, a room heavy with the scent of cured leather and bitter espresso. For 2 agonizing years, his secretary Lily poured his black coffee into his grandmother's fragile porcelain cup at exactly 3 o'clock. It was a silent performance of total surrender. She expertly managed his legitimate business fronts, while aggressively ignoring the briefcases of blood money and the hushed, violent Italian directives. We see this psychological survival tactic all the time on the screen. She was ignoring the predator's bared teeth simply to survive standing so close to him. The lesson here is simple but devastating. What we refuse to see eventually turns around and consumes us entirely. "The Romano contract needs your signature," she murmured. Her voice barely disturbed the heavy air, yet her heart pounded violently against her ribs simply from sharing this room with him. Duca did not even look up from his ledgers. The lighting catches the sharp angles of his face, emphasizing a chilling dominance. His tailored charcoal suit functioned as pure armor, projecting a physical superiority that made rival cartel bosses tremble. Even the thin scar slicing through his left eyebrow was a deliberate warning of his capacity for violence. Yet, to Lily, that scar was a heartbreakingly beautiful flaw. It is a fatal human mistake. We so often romanticize the broken pieces in others instead of recognizing the deep danger they pose to our own souls. "Anything else, Lily?" His dark baritone voice wrapped around her name, a deliberate manipulation designed to keep her off balance. Looking closely at this tragic timeline, you and I can pinpoint the exact frame where the psychological dam finally broke. For 24 agonizing months, she had maintained a fragile barrier of distance while sharing oxygen with a predator. But on this unremarkable Tuesday, her coping mechanisms failed. "Actually, yes," she breathed, sealing the heavy oak door and locking herself inside with him. Duca finally lifted his gaze, his cold eyes locking onto her trembling frame. "Here lies our shared human tragedy. We constantly mistake the calculating scrutiny of a hungry wolf for the warmth of being truly seen." He noted the closed door with absolute, clinical detachment. "Good news or bad news?" he asked. She stepped closer, the sharp click of her heels striking the marble floor acting as a physical manifestation of her escalating panic. "That depends on your answer," she whispered. Duca slowly arched a single brow, an expression he used to dismantle rival bosses and silence hardened criminals. In that split second, all of Lily's rational defenses evaporated under the sheer weight of its stare. She offered him the most dangerous vulnerability a victim can give. "I'm in love with you," she confessed. The resulting silence was an absolute vacuum. The hard truth is this: giving your fragile heart to someone entirely incapable of basic empathy only guarantees it will be crushed to dust. Duca froze completely. The camera pushes in on his face, revealing a chilling stillness that acts as a pure predatory assessment. His expression shifted into something hollow and arctic. While the city traffic hummed outside, the atmosphere inside the office thickened into a pressurized cabin. "Lily," he began, his tone dripping with cold dismissal. She interrupted him, her desperate rush of words a symptom of extreme distress. She confessed to breaking every boundary, detailing her racing pulse and her obsessive memorization of his every command. It was a classic display of the captive desperate to find humanity in the monster. We all must eventually learn to separate harsh reality from the romantic fantasies we project onto those who can never love us back. The suppressed emotion of 2 full years ruptured violently across the room. Lily wept out her own cognitive dissonance, insisting she knew his true criminal nature and simply did not care. She cited his brutal protection of the syndicate as a twisted form of loyalty, a tragic rationalization used by victims of trauma. Duca rose from his leather chair. He moved through the dimly lit space with the silent, terrifying grace of an apex predator. He invaded her personal space just enough to flood her senses with his signature scent, bright bergamot, masking the heavy tang of violence. "You don't know what you're saying," he warned her softly. "You and I need to understand this dynamic. Sometimes the loudest warning signs we choose to ignore are explicitly spoken by the threat itself." His pitch dropped into a tightly controlled register, vibrating with underlying hostility. Lily elevated her chin, a primal display of defiance masking the terror constricting her airway. She demanded a reason to stop, begging him with tearful eyes to deny any mutual affection. Watch closely how the megalomaniac responds to naked emotional demands. For a fraction of a second, a shadow registered in his dark gaze. Perhaps a fleeting echo of human regret, but he abruptly reinforced his perimeter, retreating back into the shadows. "You're a good secretary, Lily," he stated coldly. "It is a harsh but necessary lesson of the human condition. You cannot negotiate a deeply emotional connection with someone who views you entirely as a disposable business asset. Efficient, discreet, loyal. I would hate to lose you over a misguided infatuation." The terminology was precise, designed specifically to inflict maximum psychological trauma. She had just offered this man her very soul, and he evaluated her like a malfunctioning piece of office equipment. When her composure fractured, Duca's dormant cruelty surfaced in the dim light. He mercilessly mocked her expectations of a romantic resolution, stripping away the fairy tale to reveal the freezing reality of his pathology. "There's no place in it for emotional entanglements," he declared, reducing her vulnerability to a mere inconvenience. True strength is never found in enduring a monster's cruelty, but in finding the courage to finally walk away from the table. Duca weaponized his emotional distance, sealing the conversation with a quiet threat to her employment. Lily stood completely paralyzed, desperately waiting for a single shred of empathy from a man clinically devoid of it. When she finally choked out an agreement to finish the contract, he halted her at the door. Her dopamine briefly spiked and a tragic surge of hope, but the kingpin only needed to secure his asset. "Don't let this interfere with your work. I need you focused," he ordered. The psychological snap inside her was almost audible. "Pause here, you and I. This is exactly how the darkness operates. They casually extinguish your light and immediately demand you keep working for them in the dark. Your worth is never tied to how a broken person values you." She retreated to her desk, a hollow shell functioning entirely on basic autonomic responses. The outer office was deserted. Duca's enforcer was outmanaging the brutal physical labor of the syndicate. Lily collapsed into her chair as suffocating humiliation hijacked her nervous system. She had meticulously mapped the kingpin's pathology over 2 long years, yet tragically failed to predict his absolute apathy toward her bleeding heart. The psychological devastation was acute, mirroring the physical withdrawal of a severed trauma bond. In the very center of this cognitive collapse Her phone screen vibrated in the dark. It is a crucial truth of our survival. Hitting absolute rock bottom is often the only mechanism that finally forces us to look in a different direction. The glowing notification was from Lucas Morrison, a man exhibiting wonderfully healthy attachment patterns. His message offered a simple dinner and a gentle promise to improve her evening. For 2 years, Lily's willing captivity had blinded her to healthy affection, keeping her tethered to the tragic fantasy of Duca's redemption. The mob boss's brutal rejection had violently severed that tether. Operating purely on a traumatized survival instinct, she typed out a confirmation to Lucas. She decided right then to build the impenetrable professional wall Duca demanded. We see this dramatic pivot constantly. Sometimes, the initial step towards psychological healing is not made from a place of strength, but from the desperate need to build a fortress against further destruction. Duca isolated himself in his shadowy office for the remainder of the day. When Lily deposited the illicit documents into his outbox at 6 o'clock, he coldly refused to acknowledge her presence. Descending alone into the echoing concrete of the underground garage, she allocated herself precisely 300 seconds of sheer grief, 5 minutes to violently mourn a relationship that had only ever existed within her own compromised mind. She meticulously reconstructed her makeup in the rear-view mirror and drove off into the night. Her defensive strategy was set. She would bury the trauma beneath a flawless facade of administrative perfection. It is a dangerous game we play when we choose to mask our deepest wounds rather than taking the painful time to truly heal them. In the quiet isolation of her apartment, the weight of the kingpin's rejection crushed the breath from her lungs. She logically recognized the benefit of transferring her focus to Lucas, a stable alternative, yet she agonized over the brutal reality. She had presented a ruthless man with complete emotional surrender, and he classified her love as a simple business liability. The darkest element of this tragic loop was her own complicity. She knew she would return the following morning to orchestrate his schedule and pour his espresso. You and I must acknowledge the tragic nature of the trauma bond. Even when the iron cage door swings wide open, the conditioned captive will often choose to remain in the dark simply because the bright outside world feels far too terrifying. The tether to the dark remained unbroken. Her phone buzzed, lighting the dim room with a cheerful text from Lucas. To her exhausted nervous system, his steady enthusiasm felt like a heavy stone. Her fingers tapped the cold glass, typing a polite reply, mirroring a normalcy she could no longer feel. For 7 days, she floated through the office like a ghost. She walked through the doors at exactly 8:30, processed the syndicate's operations with mechanical precision, and vanished at 6. She gave the kingpin the exact sterile silence he demanded. We often shut off our own beating hearts just to survive the freezing vacuum of a toxic person's orbit. We forget that simply surviving the cold is a very different thing than actually living in the light. Let you and I step into the shadows of the syndicate, where the air feels 10 degrees colder. Lorenzo sat at his desk, filing away their fracture with chilling grace. He wore a mask of absolute professional indifference, drained of all empathy. Lily tried to build a fortress of silence. She kept her eyes glued to the floor, dissolving 2 years of electric rapport into a brittle, robotic obedience. Lorenzo did not even blink, but his enforcer, Marco, watched from the corner. Marco carried the hyper-vigilant stillness of a predator, and by Thursday, he saw the cracks in her armor. The hardest truth is that the deep wounds we desperately try to hide from those who hurt us are often perfectly visible to the strangers watching from the outside. The glow of the screen painted Lily's pale face in harsh blue light. She clung to it, refusing to look up when Marco backed her into a corner. He leaned against the heavy cabinet, his voice low and clinical as he tore down her fragile walls. He pointed out the quiet tragedy of her posture, how the fiery girl who used to challenge the boss had withered into a hollow, obedient ghost. Lily forced a tight plastic smile. She spun a practiced lie, claiming she was just drawing a healthy professional line. But her hands were shaking over the keys. It is a heartbreaking reality of our nature. We often wrap our terrifying trauma in the polite clothing of a rational choice, hoping no one will notice the absolute collapse of our spirit hiding right underneath. Marco saw right through his boss. Lorenzo had the ruthless mind of a wolf in business, yet walked completely blind through the delicate glass house of human connection. The shadow had already settled deep in Lily's mind. She realized with absolute terror that everyone in the room saw her bleeding heart, except the man who held it. Desperate to run, she reached for Luca. Friday evening arrived, and she painted on a perfect mask, dressing in soft colors to fake a peaceful life she did not possess. When Lucas handed her bright yellow roses, the cheerful petals felt completely alien against the bruised, dark reality of the syndicate. Sometimes we run toward the safest harbor we can find, only to realize our eyes have grown far too accustomed to the pitch black. Lily stood before her mirror, painstakingly rebuilding her shattered armor. She strapped on tall heels to force her spine straight, styling her hair to sever any visual tie to the quiet girl who poured Lorenzo's coffee. Taking those yellow roses from Lucas at the door, she forced her lungs to breathe in their simple scent. Lucas was daylight to Lorenzo's midnight. He was an open book, building his life on honest sweat, miles away from the smoke and blood of the criminal underground. He looked at her with genuine curiosity instead of a cold demand from her surrender. The profound truth of a damaged soul is this: when you spend years surviving a storm of cruel manipulation, a gentle breeze of true kindness feels like a foreign language you simply no longer know how to speak. The jazz of the restaurant faded into white noise when Lucas asked the wrong question. He innocently brought up Lorenzo, and Lily's back pulled tight as wire. Like a prisoner guarding the man who locked her cell, she carefully chose her words, painting the ruthless monster as a strict but fair boss. Lucas leaned across the table, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the heavy, invisible ghost sitting between them. He asked why she had pushed him away for so long, searching for the shadow of a rival. Lily looked down, offering a fragile half-truth about thinking she wanted someone else. The bitter reality is that pride always makes us lie to hide our chains. It is far easier to pretend your heart is confused than to admit you willingly threw it into the roaring fire. Lucas reached across the table, his warm hand covering hers, and offered her a solid, committed future. To a healthy heart, those words are pure sunlight. But behind Lily's fixed smile, panic alarms were screaming. Her breath went shallow. She felt like a deer trapped against a heavy fence. Her mind had been twisted by Lorenzo's cruel game of shadows, leaving her painfully addicted to the poisoned crumbs of his rare attention. Her logic screamed to grab this beautiful lifeboat, but her ruined spirit violently hungered for the drowning waters of the man who broke her. She softly agreed to be his, wearing a mask to hide a terrifying truth. We often mistake peace for absolute emptiness, especially when our tired souls have been brutally trained to mistake agonizing chaos for true love. She pushed forward, forcing herself through the motions, praying the fake warmth would catch fire. Under the amber porch light, Lucas leaned in. The kiss was incredibly gentle. He asked with his eyes, waiting for a silent yes, and because it was so kind, she felt nothing. Her ruined nervous system stayed quiet, starved of the brutal fire the kingpin had conditioned her to crave. Weeks blurred into a neat calendar of predictable dinners and sunlit brunches. When Lucas asked for an official title after 21 days, she surrendered. She grabbed his hand not out of burning passion, but as a desperate survival tactic. There is a profound, silent sadness in anchoring yourself to a safe harbor, merely because you are entirely terrified of the dark ocean that is slowly drowning you. She used this ordinary man as a shield against the psychological ruin of her boss. Lucas was simply a safe canvas, but inside the cold halls of the syndicate, the wolves never sleep. Marco caught the subtle shift in her instantly. He cornered her by the humming printer, demanding to know if Lorenzo had been informed of her new distraction. Lily snapped back, her irritation masking a suffocating panic. She fiercely defended her secret, claiming her private life meant nothing to the boss. But her blazing anger gave her entirely away. True healing is quiet and indifferent. When we react to a simple probe with explosive, trembling rage, it only proves to the watching world that our darkest chains have never been broken, merely hidden beneath a heavy sleeve. Lily lived in a fractured mirror, furiously cutting off Marco's warnings, insisting she was free from the manipulator's grip. Marco looked at her with tired eyes. Knowing his boss's terrifying nature, he quietly told her she deserved real appreciation, a ghost in their brutal underworld. 6 weeks into her desperate wait, Lucas decided to lock the doors. Under the golden chandeliers of a quiet restaurant, he slid a velvet box across the cloth, revealing a bright diamond. For Lily, the air completely vanished. This was no romantic victory. It was a violent collision between her fake paper house and the dark storm of trauma she still carried. Sometimes the bright things we eagerly grab to save ourselves become the very stones that pull us beneath the black water. The diamond threw sharp daggers of light across the table. Lucas spoke the beautiful lines of a perfect romance, and praising her fierce mind and offering the strong bricks for a safe life. It was everything a healed soul dreams of. But watch her eyes. They glossed over, completely empty. Lily floated out of her own skin, staring down from the ceiling as this milestone washed over her numb body. Deep in the bruised corners of her mind, she was not stepping into the light. She was silently, tragically begging for Lorenzo to kick the door down and drag her back into the dark. The most painful curse of our condition is this. A deeply wounded mind will look straight at a beautiful rescue ship and choose to sink with the familiar, heavy chains wrapped tightly around its own throat. Let's pause and look closely. The word yes slipped from her lips, but the girl saying it was a million miles away. The room erupted in polite applause, a warm sound crashing against the cold tomb of her guest. That ring slid onto her finger like a block of lead, entirely failing to cover the invisible brand Lorenzo had seared into her soul. She smiled, letting Lucas celebrate. But when Monday morning arrived, the ring became a weapon. She marched it straight into the lion's den. She lied to her reflection, calling the diamond a trophy of her brave healing. The dangerous truth we hide is that when we use our new, shiny happiness merely to make a toxic person jealous, we are silently confessing that they still completely own every single piece of our fragile heart. The syndicate hummed with its usual bloodless efficiency. Lorenzo sat like a dark king, orchestrating his empire, while Lily managed his schedule, ignoring the massive stone dragging down her hand. The air shifted the second he stepped out for his espresso. He walked with his sleeves rolled up, radiating the dangerous confidence of a predator. Lily placed the cup on his desk with robotic perfection, but as he reached, his bare knuckles lightly brushed against hers. A terrifying spark of electricity shot straight up her arm. In one devastating millisecond, weeks of safe healing burned to absolute ash. We can build all the walls we want, but when the architect of our ruin finally touches us, we instantly remember exactly who holds the master key to our trembling soul. The air turned to suffocating concrete. Lorenzo's eyes dropped to the diamond, staring at the shiny fence another man dared to build around his property. For one terrifying second, his perfect mask cracked. A pitch-black, territorial rage boiled in his eyes before snapping back into place. He spoke with a deathly flat voice, a horrifying signal of caged violence. Lily forced her chin up, throwing the name Lucas between them like a fragile shield. Lorenzo spit the name back with dripping disgust, his mind doing the brutal math of those 6 short weeks. The lesson here is chilling. When the devil realizes his prisoner has found a staircase up to the light, he never politely watches them leave. He simply strikes a match and burns the whole staircase down. Let us look closely at this moment together, you and I. The heavy office air shifts as Lily utters the phrase, "When you know, you know." Lorenzo's jaw tightens, a microscopic flinch that shatters his polished mask. He offers hollow congratulations, but his dark eyes burn with the furious hunger of a man denied his prize. As she turns toward the oak door, believing she has won her freedom, his voice cracks like a whip. He grips the edge of the mahogany desk, his knuckles white, visually devouring her before issuing a command stripped of all grace. Take it off. It forces us to confront a terrifying truth about human nature. Those who view another soul merely as a possession will never just open the cage and gracefully let the bird fly free. The air turns cold as he clarifies his meaning. He wants the ring gone. Watch how he closes the distance, abandoning the heavy wood desk to invade her breathing space. Lily takes a frantic step backward, her body reacting to a lethal threat. She calls him inappropriate, but a man like him only sees a hurdle to crush. He invades her shadow, declaring with terrifying calm that her future belongs to him, not her fiancé. The force of his words strikes her like a physical blow, leaving her breathless. His hand then snaps up to grip her jaw, forcing her terrified eyes to meet his dark stare. It is a harsh lesson we all must eventually learn. A predator's sudden closeness is never born of affection, but of an absolute, unbreakable need for total control. He demands it again, letting her full name roll off his tongue like a judge handing down a sentence. Behind her wide eyes, Lily's mind scrambles to make sense of the madness. Just 6 weeks ago, he coldly dismantled her worth, looking right through her as if she would chew dust on his tailored suit. Now, he stands here claiming her fate, desperate to find her footing. She throws his own cruel rejection back at his face, reminding him he called her unworthy of his time. The sheer arrogance in his quiet reply, "I know what I said," is enough to stop a heart. Her paralyzed shock slowly morphs into a trembling, righteous rage. It is something quite profound to witness. Righteous anger is often the very last shield our minds can raise when a manipulator tries to violently rewrite our shared reality. Stay with me, because Lily sees the truth in his cold eyes. This is not romance. It is a clinical takeover. Lorenzo remains still, his voice dead flat as he insists his feelings never changed. Notice the calculated shift in his body language. He steps back just long enough to slide the heavy deadbolt into place. Click. The trap is shut. He then spins a masterful lie, claiming his past cruelty was a sacrifice to shield her from his violent world. He frames her new engagement as a failure of his grand protection, his knuckles turning white as his composed mask finally cracks. It leaves us with a chilling realization to carry forward. A deeply controlling person will always find a way to dress their toxic, festering jealousy in the noble armor of protection. Despite her shaking hands, Lily tries to hold her ground. She tells him she made a choice for a normal life. Lorenzo then pulls his deadliest weapon from the shadows, his own vulnerability. He confesses to 2 agonizing years of watching her every move, painting his obsession as a tragic restraint. Lily tries to hit back with logic, pointing out the glaring holes in his dark tale. But as he steps closer into the dim light, her body simply gives up. The freeze response takes over. She stops moving entirely. He leans in close, whispering about the monsters outside these walls, binding her with invisible chains of fear. It is a haunting truth of the human heart. The strongest bonds are forged the moment someone convinces you they are the only safe harbor in a terrifying world. He builds a tragic stage, playing the martyr who bled in silence to keep her safe. But Lily refuses to read his script, tears spilling over her lashes. She reminds him of the crushing humiliation he put her through, asking if she is simply supposed to forget the scars and fall to her knees. Her defiance is a flickering candle in a dark room. Lorenzo does not yell. Instead, his large hands cup her face with a devastating, unbearable gentleness. The scene lingers on his thumb, brushing her cheek as he finally confesses his true sin. He could not stomach the thought of another man claiming her. It is a brutal reality we cannot ignore. A man consumed by power does not actually weep over the loss of true love. He violently mourns the loss of his prized possessions. Now, you and I are watching the exact frame where the poison finally reaches her heart. He whispers that losing her is tearing him apart. This perfectly timed crack in his armor destroys her final defense. Slipping into the voice of a wounded child, she breathes out how utterly worthless he made her feel. He does not deny it. He leans his forehead against hers, catching a falling tear with his thumb, swearing to spend his life making it right. But the devil always collects his due. In the next breath, he demands she take off the ring and burn her future to the ground. Her eyes flash with a dying spark of rage. The lesson here is terribly sad to witness. Those who break you will often present themselves as the only medicine capable of healing the exact wounds they carved into your skin. She makes one attempt to hold the line, reminding him she is an employee. Lorenzo shatters the illusion, pulling her flush against his chest. He masterfully shifts the narrative. He is no longer the ruthless boss. He is the tormented lover, willing to let his dark empire burn to ashes just to hold her. The weight of his confession is intoxicating. You can hear her breath hitch in the quiet room as the venom sinks into her veins. He wraps her in his shadow, whispering that his love is a terrifying, absolute force. It brings us to a chilling realization. When a dangerous person renames their violent obsession as true romance, the broken victim will almost always mistake the cold steel bars of their cage for a warm, protective sanctuary. The final ultimatum hangs in the tense air between them. Her safe life is the price of admission to his dark world. If we could hear her heartbeat, it would be racing in total panic. Deep down, she knows her fiancé represents warm sunlight, quiet mornings, and a life free from terror. But standing in the heavy shadows of this office, Lorenzo's gravitational pull is simply too strong. She mistakes the sickening spike of fear and adrenaline for sweeping romance. Driven by this toxic high, she weakly tries to negotiate the terms of her surrender. Clinging to the illusion that she still has a choice, it reveals a tragic flaw in human nature. We will so easily throw away a quiet, peaceful reality if the incoming destruction is packaged with enough sweeping, cinematic intensity. With tears staining her cheeks, she tries to draft a contract with the devil. She demands equal footing in his violent world, pleading for the right to make choices. Lorenzo nods without missing a beat, smoothly handing over empty promises that cost him nothing. Her shattered nervous system begs for comfort, and he delivers it flawlessly, staring deep into her eyes and reciting vows of eternal devotion. Trembling under his gaze, she begs him to be real with her, to swear this is not just a sick game of dominance. But the scene knows the truth even if she does not. You cannot force a power-hungry person to be emotionally honest. They will simply become the perfect mirror, reflecting whatever beautiful lie guarantees your total submission. She looks up at him and begs for the power to destroy him, just as easily as he can destroy her. It is the tragic climax of a trauma bond, two souls seeking balance in mutual annihilation. Lorenzo's eyes shift, his face softening as massively Samis simulates a profound realization. He whispers that she has held the knife to his throat since the day she walked into his office, twisting his own predatory stalking into an act of helpless vulnerability. Then comes the final, devastating turn of the screw. He softly challenges her courage, placing the entire weight of the choice squarely on her shoulders. It is a brilliant, terrifying maneuver to remember. By painting a victim's total surrender as an act of immense bravery, the manipulator ensures they will gladly lock the cage door themselves. Watch how the camera frames the end of this tragedy. Lily clearly sees the blood on his hands and the darkness waiting to swallow her whole. But reason has left the building, drowned out by the deafening roar of her obsession. She believes that taming the beast is a prize worth bleeding for. Slowly, with trembling fingers, she slides the diamond ring off her hand. The soft clink of the metal against the hard mahogany desk echoes like a judge's gavel. It is a complete surrender of her light to the king of the shadows. His large hands pull her into the dark, claiming his hard-won prize. The scene fades on a devastating truth. Trading a peaceful life for a chaotic obsession never brings true salvation. It only forces you to learn entirely new, far more dangerous rules for survival. The camera tightens on the heavy oak door. Lorenzo pins Lily against the wood, his fingers tangled ruthlessly in her hair, cutting off her escape and her breath all at once. It isn't a lover's embrace, it is a predator marking his kill. The harsh overhead lighting catches the dilated darkness in his eyes, pure adrenaline. "Tell me you're mine," he demands. A quiet, absolute order. She breathes the words back to him, mistaking this total eclipse of her soul for a victory. She begs for him to belong to her too, to tear down his walls. He lies effortlessly, whispering that he always was. It is a terrifying, age-old tragedy, the prisoner believing she holds the keys, just because the warden has chained his hand to hers. Sometimes, we mistake the very cages that trap us for the shelter we've always wanted. Let's look at this defining moment together, you and I. 3 sharp knocks shatter the silence of their locked room. Marco's voice bleeds through the door, mentioning a syndicate call, bringing the blood and dirt of Lorenzo's empire right back into the frame. Yet the mob boss doesn't even blink. His dark, unyielding gaze remains physically locked onto Lily. He answers the door, running a global underworld, while his eyes keep his newly won prize entirely paralyzed. He orders her to cut all ties to her normal world, to shatter her engagement to Lucas today. We see the last flicker of her conscience die in her trembling breath. Here is a hard truth about human nature. Once a toxic bond takes root, we will willingly burn down our own safe havens just to keep the fire going. The lighting shifts, catching the shadow crossing Lily's face. She feels the suffocating weight of guilt, a desperate need to look Lucas in the eye and end their engagement properly. But watch Lorenzo's reaction. The muscle in his jaw leaps, a microscopic spasm of pure threatened control. He refuses to let her go alone. He isn't protecting her. He is dragging his newly conquered territory out to parade in front of a dying rival. Lily hears the possessive grit in his voice. In a healthy mind, that cold, territorial growl would be a blaring siren, urging her to run. Instead, her fractured spirit drinks it in. It's a tragic flaw in the human heart. When we are desperate enough to be valued, we will confuse a monster's possessive jealousy with genuine, unconditional love. Let's pause and really look at this frame together. Lily's voice shakes as she whispers that this is cruel, but the camera lingers on Lorenzo's icy, deadened eyes. Empathy doesn't exist in his world. He tells her plainly that he doesn't care, his voice dropping into a deadly register as he thinks about her spending 6 weeks with another man. In his mind, Lily isn't a woman making a choice. She is stolen property he is finally reclaiming. He leans in close, vowing that no other man will ever touch what is his. Any rational person would bolt for the nearest exit, but Lily stays rooted to the floor, drowning in his shadow. We often forget this painful reality. Sometimes, the gravity of someone else's darkness is so strong, it completely overrides our own basic instinct to survive. The silence in the room stretches out, heavy and suffocating. After feeling invisible for weeks, the sheer, crushing weight of Lorenzo's attention feels like a drug in Lily's veins. It terrifies her, yet she leans into it. Trying to scrape back a tiny sliver of control, she looks up through her lashes, begging him to promise her complete honesty. Without missing a beat, he swears to it. He murmurs that no other woman has existed for him since the second he laid eyes on her. The lie, or the terrifying truth, washes over her, flushing her cheeks with a counterfeit warmth. He paints himself as both the poison and the cure. It is a sobering reminder for us all. When you are starving for affection, even a drop of poison will taste exactly like the sweetest glass of water. Lily's voice breaks as she reminds him of the wreckage she just created, calling him her damnation. Lorenzo simply pulls her closer, his grip tightening until her breath hitches, a physical punctuation mark on his absolute rule. Suddenly, a phone buzzes against the mahogany desk. Notice how the lighting seems to chill as he shifts gears. He smooths his tie, snapping right back into the cold, calculating king of the underworld. Then comes the trap. He casually mentions she won't be going back to her apartment. He curves a dangerous, beautiful smile, calling it protection. Isolation is always dressed up as safety at first. Life teaches us this painful lesson, time and time again. The walls built to keep out the bad guys are often the exact same walls used to lock the prisoner inside. He dictates the terms of her new life, moving so fast she doesn't have a single second to catch her breath or find her reasons. He tells her to take off Lucas's ring. He orders her to change her clothes, erasing every trace of the life she built. To anyone watching from the outside, this total erasure of her identity is a blaring neon warning sign, but the camera focuses on Lily's face. She actually smiles, nodding softly. He even tells her how she is allowed to speak to him now. As she walks out of his office, her knees shake and her mind spins, completely short-circuited by the sudden drop into total submission. It's a tragedy we see too often in this world. We will gladly surrender our freedom if we believe the person taking it is the only one who truly sees us. Look closely at the desk in this next shot. The modest diamond ring sits abandoned beside her keyboard, a tiny monument to a quiet, safe life she is throwing away. Yet, as Lily stares at it, she only feels a sick, hollow relief. She lies to herself, pretending this betrayal is actually an act of mercy for Lucas. Then her screen lights up. A text from Lorenzo. They are going to buy a new ring today. A collar masquerading as jewelry. She types out a weak reply asking why they have to move so fast. But her fingers barely press the keys. The resistance is totally fake. A ghost of her former independence. A hard truth about falling into darkness is this. By the time you finally think to ask if you're moving too fast, you've already crossed the point of no return. His reply flashes on her screen, cold and delete stripped of romance. He flatly types that he's putting his ring on her hand before she has a chance to change her mind. It is a bold, terrifying confession of his trap. Lily reads it, fully aware that this man is a dangerous cliff edge. Yet, still buzzing from the heat of his hands on her skin, she closes her eyes and steps off the ledge anyway. She tricks herself into believing this freefall is just romance. Outside her door, the heavy, muffled thud of aggressive syndicate negotiations drags on for nearly an hour. Life is full of quiet moments right before the crash, reminding us that the most destructive choices we make aren't usually blind mistakes, but tragic decisions we walk into with our eyes wide open. In the quiet of her empty office, Lily tries to steady her shaking hands, silently rehearsing the exact words she'll use to break Lucas's heart. When Lorenzo's heavy door finally swings open, the shift in the room's energy is violent. He steps out radiating the terrifying absolute power of a crime lord. The air around him practically bleeds. But the second his eyes find Lily, the brutal mask melts away. His gaze goes soft, mimicking true vulnerability as he holds out his hand to her. She reaches back, feeling the thick, violent calluses on his palms, the physical scars of the blood he has spilled to build his throne. We must never forget, a monster who can cry on command is infinitely more dangerous than one who simply bares his teeth. The second, their skin touches, a shockwave of adrenaline crashes through Lily, locking her fate into place. Just then, Marco steps into the frame. He flashes a knowing, easy grin at the two of them, normalizing this twisted union. The men smoothly shift the conversation from romance straight to murder, casually mentioning a rival crew they just buried. Lorenzo's thumb slowly strokes the back of Lily's hand, self-soothing while admiring his favorite new toy. Marco's next words drop the temperature in the room to freezing. By standing at the king's side, Lily is now the ultimate target for every gun in the city. The tragedy of attaching yourself to power is this: the crown might shine in the light, but it always makes your head the easiest target in the dark. The erasure of her old life happens with brutal, military speed. Lorenzo assigns a shadow team of armed guards to watch her every step. Her freedom is gone, completely swallowed whole. Yet Lily looks up at his hard jaw line and mistakes this total surveillance for love. She sees his guns as a shield, entirely forgetting that he is the one who dragged her onto the battlefield. As they step into the private elevator, a tiny, desperate pulse of guilt makes her suggest warning Lucas first. Lorenzo's eyes go black. He rejects it instantly. He wants to watch the other man break, framing his vicious cruelty as proof of his devotion. It's the final bitter lesson of the tragedy. True love seeks to build you up, but possession only ever seeks to own the ruins. You and I have watched this tragic scene unfold before, haven't we? It always starts in a tight, inescapable space. The camera pushes in as he corners her against the cold concrete of the parking garage. He traps her there, his voice heavy with a sick, unyielding entitlement. In his eyes, her past love was never a choice she made, but a theft of something that belonged solely to him. He does not hide his cruelty. He wears it like a badge, confessing his desperate need to break his rival just for the thrill of it. His touch holds no warmth, only the brutal, heavy branding of a man claiming his prize. Look closely at her smudged makeup and shaking hands. The lesson is hard to swallow, but true. Control often disguises itself as passion until the cage is already locked. The scene shifts to the dark interior of his luxury car. He opens her door with a smooth, practiced grace. It is a hollow performance meant to twist her mind and hide the absolute coldness underneath. As the streetlights wash over his face, he keeps his heavy hand anchored on her thigh, a quiet, constant reminder that she cannot run. When he casually asks about her racing heart, a flicker of true clarity hits her. She knows the man she is leaving is completely innocent, but Lorenzo is a master director of her guilt. He spins the narrative in seconds, convincing her that breaking a good man is simply the cost of her own broken heart. We often blame ourselves for the damage others force us to cause, believing their lies because the truth hurts too much. Listen to the exact words she uses as the shadows of the city pass by her window. He demands to hear her surrender out loud, needing the raw sound of her submission. And she gives it to him, tragically mistaking her own collapse for a breath of freedom. She speaks with the hollow tone of someone drowning, calling him her gravity, a force she can no longer fight. She confesses that without his dark shadow, she feels entirely empty. She promises to walk into the fire as long as he is holding the match. It is the final, heartbreaking death of her sense of worth. When we tie our entire existence to the approval of someone who hurts us, we do not find love. We just lose the very core of who we are. Her mind is entirely gone now. He lifts her trembling fingers to his lips, and for one chilling second, the mask slips completely. He tells her the truth. He admits that watching her at work every single day was nothing more than a slow, calculated hunt. He dreamed of tearing down her walls, piece by piece. He does not pretend to be a good man. The camera catches the cold, dead look in his eyes as he admits he does not deserve her. Yet he is selfish enough to take her anyway. He lays out his plan to lock her in his world long before she ever realizes the door is shut. He promises a life of chaos and fear, knowing she is already too blind to run away. Sometimes the most dangerous people do not lie to us. They tell us exactly who they are, and we simply refuse to listen. You and I are going to look closely at this moment together, because this is where the final thread snaps. She sits frozen in the passenger seat, gripping his hand, whispering that he does not need to fight his feelings anymore. She truly thinks this is her own choice. But watch the framing. They park outside the quiet, safe home of her fiancé, Lucas. Lorenzo cuts the engine and hands her a fake key to her own prison, telling her she can walk up those steps alone. But a man like him never rolls the dice. He has already rewired her instincts. Terrified of her own shadow, she begs him to come with her. The heavy iron gate closes. True manipulation does not look like a command. It looks like giving someone the choice to lock their own cell. A slow, dark smile creeps across his face. This is not the look of a man in love. It is the look of a king conquering a rival nation. He steps out into the cool night air, offering his hand, and guides her toward the stairs with a heavy palm pressed against her spine. It looks like protection, but it is pure ownership, a brand burned into her skin. They reach the landing, and the door swings open. Lucas stands there, his face completely lighting up with pure, innocent joy. But the light dies the exact second he sees the tall, silent shadow looming right behind the woman he loves. Lily's voice barely works as she asks to step inside. Intuition is a powerful thing. Even before a single word is spoken, our bodies always know when the wolf is at the door. Take a good look at this room. Lucas has built a warm, brightly lit space, filled with soft colors and quiet comfort. It is the physical shape of a safe harbor. But Lily's mind has been twisted to see peace as something repulsive. Lucas stares at the two of them, the shock knocking the wind out of his lungs as he recognizes the ruthless boss from her office. Lorenzo stands perfectly still. His face is carved from stone, completely empty of pity. His voice is dead calm as he tells Lucas that Lily's something to share. She looks back at Lorenzo, her eyes begging for him to soften the blow. But he just watches her. He wants her to hold the blade. We must always beware the person who demands we destroy our own peace just to prove our loyalty. Lucas steps back, his face twisting in raw confusion. He asks if he made a mistake, desperately searching for a reason why his world is ending. Lily whispers that he was wonderful, a truth that only twists the knife deeper into his chest. She looks to Lorenzo one more time, needing his silent nod before she finally breaks Lucas's heart. She tells him her promises of a normal, quiet life were nothing but a desperate lie. The awful truth settles into the quiet room. Lucas stares at the expensive suit and cold eyes of the man ruining his life, and his sorrow boils over into fury. He screams at Lorenzo for standing there with that sick, proud look. Lorenzo does not blink. He just coldly declares his ownership. You cannot reason with someone who views people as property. Let us pause and watch how easily Lorenzo twists the knife. He calmly speaks, reducing Lucas's entire future with her to nothing more than a temporary distraction. Lucas tries to hold his ground, pleading about the weeks they spent planning a life together. But he is a normal man fighting a monster. Lorenzo steps close, his massive frame eating up the light in the small room. He tells Lucas that every smile Lily ever gave him was just a fake, polite mask she wore for the sake of survival. He does not just steal her away. He poisons every good memory Lucas has left. And the real tragedy? Lily nods along. When a lie is repeated loud enough in the dark, the broken mind will eventually accept it as the truth. The bond is now completely unbreakable. She tells Lucas her heart belonged to someone else all along. It sounds like poetry, but it is just the tragic script of a stolen mind. Lucas looks down at the silver ring trembling in her hand, the ghost of a life he will never get to live. His voice breaks as he tells her to keep it, throw it away, or burn it. The grief in his chest is so heavy he can barely lift his arm to point toward the door. Lily feels a sudden, sharp pain in her gut. For a split second, her real self tries to wake up, but Lorenzo is already there, his heavy hand sliding down her back, pushing her out the door before she can speak. We cannot use innocent people to hide from our demons. In the end, the demon always finds us, and the innocent are the ones left bleeding. The heavy door clicks shut. Out in the dim hallway, the rush of adrenaline crashes, and Lily sags against the peeling wallpaper. She whispers how deeply it hurts, desperately needing Lorenzo to tell her she is not a monster. He pulls her tight against his chest, playing the perfect savior in the tragedy he directed. He brushes off the damage, coldly stating that the other man will bounce back in no time. His eyes show absolutely zero remorse, but then he spins the wheel, turning himself into the victim. He whispers about the agony he endured, forced to watch another man touch what belonged to him. The darkest hearts will burn your house to the ground, and then demand you thank them for keeping you warm by the fire. He needs her complete gratitude. She looks up at the shadow of the man who just burned her life to ashes. Her voice shakes as she asks what happens next. Lorenzo gives her a slow, terrifying smile. It is a blaring alarm bell, but her broken mind simply ignores the sound. He leans down and tells her exactly how the rest of her life will go. He will buy her a heavy diamond to mark his territory, and then he will take her home to seal the claim in the dark. The knot twisting in her stomach is pure, raw terror, but her shattered brain translates it into twisted desire. She tries to push back, calling him arrogant. He just laughs softly, calling it the honest truth. The saddest reality is that once we stop fighting for our own voice, the silence begins to feel exactly like peace. You and I must look closely at this final frame. This is the exact moment the last wall of her soul collapses. Wrapped in his tight grip, she feels his heavy, threatening presence and somehow mistakes it for safety. Her surrender is absolute. He kisses her, but there is no love in it. It is a violent, possessive seal. The camera pulls back as he leads her down a hidden, unmarked street to a private jeweler. They step through thick steel doors into a room draped in rich velvet, completely cut off from the noise of the real world. This is how the trap is finalized. Isolation, wrapped in staggering wealth. But the lesson here remains the same until the end of time. A gilded cage is still a cage, no matter how many diamonds they scatter on the floor. The air in the viewing room feels thick with the scent of polished wood and quiet fear. Giovanni bows his head, offering the trembling deference reserved for an apex predator. Watch Lorenzo's hands closely. He does not hold Lily. He cages her. His grip is a calculated vise, pinning her against his tailored suit. When he demands a ring, it is not a token of love, but an iron brand of ownership. Cost, he murmurs, means nothing. Lily sinks into the crushed velvet sofa, her eyes wide as she runs the brutal mathematics in her head. A single stone here could buy her entire life. She whispers a fragile protest, her voice breaking, but Lorenzo smoothly brushes the words away. You and I must recognize a terrifying truth today. When a controlling figure freely buys your reality, they are silently purchasing your absolute compliance. Lorenzo's thumb slowly traces the bare skin of her ring finger, a hypnotic friction designed to anchor her terrified focus entirely on him. Notice how the classic proposal is absent. He does not ask for her future. He dictates the terms of her surrender. He demands a stone heavy enough to announce her new status within his shadowed empire. A flicker of dissonance crosses Lily's pale face. Her brow furrows slightly as she whispers that they never even discussed marriage. She is correct. He merely declared it as an unavoidable doom. In the twisted mind of a narcissist, consent is never a question, only an assumption. He chuckles at the notion of a normal courtship, his dark eyes fixed. The essential life lessons here is simple. True partnership relies on a freely shared voice, never a unilateral mandate wearing the mask of romance. To tighten his psychological snare, Lorenzo's voice drops to a velvety whisper, reciting the quiet, mundane details of her morning routines. By wrapping his dark obsession in the gentle cadence of love, he expertly strips away the last trembling layers of her resistance. It is a masterful, horrifying display of affection used as a chain. Before a tear can slip down her cheek, Giovanni returns, shattering the spell. The broker nervously points to a rare sapphire, but Lorenzo's gaze locks onto a massive, brutal emerald. Lily shakes her head, her voice trembling as she notes how impossible such a stone is for a normal life. Lorenzo just smiles, his teeth gleaming softly in the dim light. The lesson we must take from this is clear. Grand gestures are very often engineered to permanently blind our rational intuition. The shadows in the room lengthen as Lorenzo smoothly dismisses her logic, ordering her to stop thinking like a mere employee. He slides the cold, heavy platinum of the emerald onto her shaking finger. Lily exhales slowly, feeling the immense weight of the jewelry. She stares, completely mesmerized, as the brilliant green fractures the low light against her pale skin. She is actively falling in love with her own cage. Green, he whispers, represents loyalty. Yet, when she looks up, his real darkness bleeds out. He coldly admits the color reminds him of a dress she wore with another man, a memory that still ignites his violent territorial rage. Let us look at this closely together. The critical lesson here is that true danger arrives the exact moment you confuse a partner's suffocating jealousy for a romantic compliment. Lorenzo seals the purchase with a sharp nod, entirely bypassing her consent. Then he pivots to a brilliant, terrifying maneuver. He tightens his grip on her trembling fingers and demands to see the men's bands. If she is to wear his mark, he casually declares, he will wear hers. A tragic, soft blush rushes into Lily's cheeks. She looks at him with wide eyes, tragically mistaking this calculated mirroring for genuine emotional surrender. In this violent world, rings are a public branding iron. By offering his own hand, Lorenzo crafts a flawless illusion of shared power. He steps inside the cage just long enough to lock the door. Please remember this simple life lesson. A seasoned manipulator will gladly wear a symbolic collar, so long as it convinces the victim to gratefully lock the leash around their own neck. The jeweler's hands shake slightly as he presents a velvet tray of thick masculine bands. Lorenzo selects a heavy platinum ring that perfectly mirrors the cold weight of her engagement stone. He slides it onto his own finger with grim finality, cementing his psychological claim over her. For Lily, watching the metal catch the dim light, a profound shift takes place. The frantic delusion is now solid reality. Giovanni nervously clears his throat, offering a 2-week timeline for sizing. Lorenzo's jaw tightens. With the chilling impatience of a predator securing his prey, he cuts the timeline down. They will marry in a month. You and I must understand the terrible mechanics of this urgency. The great lesson here is that an abuser will always accelerate the timeline, ensuring the victim has zero space to process or escape. The decree hits Lily like a physical blow. Her pupils dilate, and the frantic flutter of her pulse is visible at her throat. 1 month feels like a death sentence to her freedom. Sensing her panic, Lorenzo counters instantly, his voice dropping into a dark purr as he threatens an immediate Vegas elopement instead. His dangerous, devastating smile completely masks the control. When she offers a fragile laugh to diffuse the tension, his large hands cup her delicate face, physically anchoring her to his gravity. She is already his, he whispers. Lorenzo leans down, kissing her with a bruising thoroughness that forcefully overrides her panic. Logic melts into pure sensory overload. The lesson we find in her desperate plea to be taken home is that reason simply cannot survive when deep fear and intense desire violently collide. A shadow of predatory promise darkens Lorenzo's eyes. He offers her a flawlessly constructed false choice. They can go to her small apartment or his sprawling estate. Exhausted and trauma-bonded, Lily chooses his, desperately eager to step inside his golden enclosure. As the armored car glides through the night, He leans close, warning her with literal precision that once she enters his domain, she will never leave. It is the overt language of a hostage taker, yet her shattered mind digests it as poetry. She nods against his shoulder. He owns the entire top floor of the city's most impregnable tower, a masterclass in physical isolation. We must always remember this life lesson. The most dangerous, inescapable prisons are never built with iron bars, but with gentle promises of eternal, absolute safety. Stepping out of the elevator, Lily braces for a cold stronghold. But the penthouse is devastatingly beautiful. Warm woods and deeply personal art line the walls, designed specifically to lower her last psychological defenses. Massive windows reduce the chaotic city to a silent carpet of lights. As she steps toward the glass, Lorenzo appears behind her. His chest presses against her back, a classic posture of physical dominance. He points to the horizon, offering her his entire empire, framing her as his equal queen. This is the peak of the grooming phase. Caught in the delusion of romantic purity, she turns, refusing the wealth, whispering she only wants him. His hands tangle in her hair. The lesson here is deeply tragic. Rejecting the material wealth of a monster does not save you from becoming his most prized possession. In the dim light, Lorenzo weaponizes his own brokenness. He speaks of his violent edges, using his pathology to make her feel exceptionally chosen. "Show me," Lily breathes, completely surrendering the last thread of her survival instinct. His response is an absolute, physical claiming. He lifts her effortlessly, carrying her deep into the inner sanctum of the penthouse. The bedroom mirrors the darkest corners of his psyche, masculine, suffocating in charcoal and dark wood. He stands her by the bed. His large hands trace the zipper of her dress with terrifying expertise. He murmurs into her throat, confessing how long he has obsessively visualized this exact subjugation. A vital life lesson to carry. When someone shows you their violent edges, never mistake their dark confession for an invitation to heal them. Her trembling fingers unbutton his shirt, exposing the scarred, muscular reality of the man who now dictates her existence. As her dress pools silently on the hardwood floor, Lorenzo's gaze turns chillingly cold, entirely objectifying the woman before him. He details his darkest fantasy, stripping her down, forcing her to repeat his name until her past identity is burned away. You and I have seen this exact dynamic in stories of the condemned. The captor demands the victim happily hand over the key to their own cell. She pushes his shirt off his shoulders, declaring she was always his. With dead calm, he promises to show her exactly what surrender entails. The lesson is grim. The greatest tragedy of the human heart is our willingness to erase our identity just to feel safely held by the one who destroys us. The shadows consume them as Lorenzo begins the systematic, ruthless dismantling of her final physical boundaries. He maps her trembling skin like a conqueror, learning the exact pressure required to force sounds of total submission from her lips. Hours later, Lily compares the sensation to coming home while simultaneously plunging off a cliff. It is the perfect, heartbreaking definition of a trauma bond. Lorenzo handles her softly now, with terrifying reverence, treating her like a priceless vase he could easily crush. They lie tangled in the black linens. The massive emerald on her finger catches the city's glow, a glittering shackle in the dark. He quietly asks if she has regrets, and she eagerly gives him absolution. The life lesson echoes loudly. True love builds a foundation. It never asks you to find comfort in the fall. Staring into the dark, Lily whispers that her only true regret is the time she wasted trying to preserve her own independence. It is the devastating, tragic endpoint of her total psychological conditioning. Lorenzo's large hand cups her cheek, his thumb brushing her lips as he reaffirms his permanent ownership. He swears he will never let her go, in a tiny, unconscious bid to keep one last sliver of her soul. She asks to hyphenate her name. She attempts to frame this as a romantic merger of equals. Lorenzo, knowing this pathetic rebellion changes absolutely nothing about his iron grip, smiles warmly and agrees. She presses her lips to his chest, clinging desperately to the illusion of partnership. Let us leave with this final, vital lesson. A gilded cage does not become a sanctuary simply because the prisoner is allowed to choose the color of the bars. Morning breaks over the penthouse, cruel and bright, the harsh sunlight slicing through the glass walls like a blade. Lily wakes, feeling the suffocating, heavy heat of Lorenzo's arm pinning her waist to the mattress. For a fleeting second, the room spins with confusion, but it is swiftly drowned out by a sickening rush of warmth. She turns her head, studying his chest rising and falling. In sleep, his sociopathic armor melts away, leaving a boyish vulnerability that is entirely a lie. She has chosen the predator, and he has chosen his permanent victim. We often think shared trauma is the same thing as love, but a shared cage never truly makes a safe home. His dark hair lies tangled against the stark white pillows. Her eyes trace the faint, bruising marks on his skin, the physical receipts of their mutual consumption. Without even parting his eyelashes, he orders her to stop staring. She tries to keep the air light, teasing him about faking sleep just to watch her. But this hypervigilance is built into his bones. He hauls her flush against his chest, totally unbothered by the ticking clock. When she realizes it is past 9, a cold spike of panic hits her. The thought of facing Marco and his men terrifies her. Sometimes, the hardest part of walking into the dark is letting the rest of the world see who you have decided to hold hands with. Listen closely to how he speaks to her. He wants every eye in his empire to witness his total conquest. The polite mask of their office days is dead. His hand slides up her neck, his thumb tracing her jawline, a physical brand of absolute authority. Her days of answering phones are over, he whispers. She is no longer just a secretary. A future wife requires a crown, so he casually hands her the title of Executive Director of Operations. She tries to protest, stammering about ethics and unearned power, but Lorenzo only smiles, brimming with the chilling arrogance of a man who makes his own gravity. The truth is simple. You cannot negotiate morals with someone who holds the keys to your reality. He paints the sudden promotion as long overdue justice, bending her reality until his manipulation looks like a gift. Lily, still gripping the frayed edges of her old moral compass, fights back. She refuses to wear his power as a cheap reward for sharing his bed. But this desperate resistance only makes his eyes shine with dark approval. He praises her stubborn pride, using her own goodness as a weapon to pull her closer to his chest. "You are not like the other women," he murmurs into her hair. "It is the ultimate narcotic for a wounded soul." We all want to feel special, but demanding validation from a monster is the fastest way to forget what you used to look like in the mirror. He shifts his heavy frame over hers, blotting out the light. He feeds her the exact words she is starving to hear, promising to speak his love every single day. It is a brilliant cold technique meant to cement the chain around her neck. She dares him to prove those words with actions, blind to the fact that his actions have already built the walls of her prison. A low, dark laugh rumbles in his throat as he calls her greedy. When they finally walk into headquarters at 11, the air in the room shifts. Marco immediately stares at the heavy diamond and Lorenzo's iron grip on her spine. Love can be a beautiful shelter, yes, but beware the shelter that comes with a heavy steel lock. Let us look at this piece by piece, you and I. Watch how the engagement ring catches the harsh office light. For a man like Lorenzo, a diamond is not a promise of soft affection. It is a warning sign planted on fresh soil. He casually shatters her professional boundaries, dragging her identity straight into his bloody world. The sudden chaos of the rival syndicate is just a new stage for his madness to play out. He commands the room, and she is merely a prop in his grand play. It teaches us an enduring truth about the human heart. Far too often what we mistake for raw, passionate romance is merely the terrifying architecture of our own emotional captivity. The air goes freezing cold the moment his territory is threatened. The doting lover vanishes in an instant, replaced by a shadow made of muscle and violence. The Castellano family is testing him, knocking on the glass of his empire to see if the new girl has made him weak. Every line in his face tightens with paranoid rage. Marco watches quietly, knowing the enemies want to see if this romance has clouded his boss's vision. Lorenzo's icy, controlled voice is just a shield to hide his fear of losing control. It happens to the best of us in the real world. We build massive walls to look untouchable, completely ignoring the fact that our greatest weaknesses are locked inside with us. Lorenzo demands a face-to-face meeting on neutral ground before the sun even sets. Look closely at how he uses Lily here. She begs to stay out of the waterfront dispute, but he bulldozes her fear, calling her his true partner. This is the tragic hook of Stockholm Syndrome. By pulling her onto the throne of his criminal empire, he makes her feel seen, respected, important. But the harsh truth is that he is just holding her up as a human shield against the bullets in the dark. It is a heavy warning for anyone caught in the current of a powerful person. Real respect means keeping you safe from the fire, not dragging you into the flames to prove how brightly you can burn. The next 8 hours are a masterclass in psychological rot. Lorenzo drowns her in legal documents and blood money spreadsheets. He paints the enemy's betrayal in vivid colors, casting himself as the tragic righteous victim of an unfair war. Lily trembles, finally realizing that the rival family is hunting her just to hurt him. Lorenzo feeds on that terror, wrapping his arms around her and whispering that they are in this together. He is rewriting her soul, turning her fear into fierce loyalty. It is a terrifying mirror for our own lives. When we are scared enough, we will gladly abandon our moral compass just to feel safe in the arms of the very person who caused the danger. He showers her with fear, calling her brilliant, making her feel utterly irreplaceable. He twists her years of fetching coffee into a glorious origin story for a Mafia queen. As the car cuts through the rainy streets toward the 8 p.m. meeting, the tension is thick enough to choke on. He builds up her panic about the enemy. Marco Castellano's icy math, Vincent's explosive anger, only to position his own chest as her only sanctuary. It is a bitter lesson on human endurance. Give a person enough stress, isolate them in the dark, and they will surrender their freedom for the warm, comforting illusion of a savior, even if that savior is holding a loaded gun. Lily finally cracks, her voice shaking as she admits her fear of the men waiting inside. Lorenzo does not offer a soft kiss. Instead, his jaw tightens into granite, and he vows to slaughter anyone who dares touch his property. The objectification is deafening. He guides her into the dim, heavy silence of the restaurant. The enemy family waits, flanked by giants in tailored suits. Lorenzo presses his palm flat against the base of her spine. She leans into the warmth, thinking it is love. But it is a leash, a flag planted for the wolves to see. Never forget this simple rule. Just because a hand holds you tightly in the freezing cold does not mean it is trying to keep you warm. We have arrived at the table. You and I must watch this carefully. Marco Castellano fires the first bullet, dripping with venom as he mocks her new title of future wife. Lily's shoulders pull back. She insists on using her own last name, a desperate, heartbreaking attempt to hold on to the ghost of who she used to be. Vincent laughs, a nasty sound that echoes off the walls. But Lorenzo strikes back, pulling Lily close and weaponizing their toxic romance. He uses their heat to mock the lifeless marriages of his rivals, twisting the knife deep into Teresa's pride. Be very careful of someone who uses your most intimate, fragile feelings as a cheap sword to wound the people they hate. The air shifts as the bloody business of the waterfront begins. Lorenzo pulls out his documents with the icy perfection of a demon quoting scripture. He lays out his legal right to the territory, proving he abandoned sectors 4 through 7 for 18 months exactly as the contract demanded. Vincent, burning with reckless anger, slams his hand down, challenging the new permits in Sector 12. And right there, in the crossfire of monsters, Lily makes her fatal choice. She throws her voice into the fight, defending the man who ruined her. It is a crushing, terrible truth of the human condition. Pour enough of your heart into a burning house, and eventually you will throw yourself into the fire. Picture the scene with me. The boardroom is swallowed by suffocating silence the moment Lily's voice drops the final legal clause. Across the mahogany table, Vincent's sneer falters. He tries to claw back his dignity, spitting out the word secretary as if it were poison. But Lorenzo commands the room. The shadows seem to harden around him as he leans forward, his voice a terrifying rumble. He renames her before them all: director, partner, fiancé. Vincent visibly shrinks under the immense weight of the unspoken threat. Lorenzo has weaponized her brilliant mind perfectly, remaining the undisputed predator. You see, when you solve a brutal problem for a dangerous man, you do not win your freedom. You only prove you are far too valuable to ever let go. The air in the room is razor thin. Teresa desperately tries to soften the bleeding edge of the moment, blaming the friction on simple paperwork. But Marco's cold eyes tell the truth. This was a calculated trap, a brutal test to see if love had eroded Lorenzo's ruthless mind. Watch how the camera would linger on Lorenzo's face here. He does not flinch. Instead, he orchestrates a breathtaking illusion, declaring to the wolves that Lily is his anchor. Here, where's this manufactured vulnerability like an impenetrable suit of armor? Beside him, Lily's breath catches. A flush of heat betrays her absolute devotion. It is a beautifully tragic surrender. The human heart will eagerly swallow a gorgeous, romanticized lie if it means surviving the chilling reality of its own invisible cage. The heavy doors close, sealing the victory. The rival patriarch bows his head, and the twisted psychological theater ends. Moments later, the steel of their armored car locks them in the dark. Lorenzo pulls her into a consuming kiss, his hands gripping her with frightening intensity. He whispers dark praises of her feral grace in that boardroom. Her hands, however, are violently shaking. She confesses the raw, sickening terror that had gripped her throat the entire time. He simply brushes a stray tear from her cheek, blind to her bleeding soul, worshipping only the flawless mask she wore. It is a devastating truth of the dark. To a master manipulator, your internal bleeding means absolutely nothing, so long as your outward obedience remains a perfect picture. Look at the way his fingers trace her jawline, a quiet claim of ownership in the dim light. He is sealing her fate, binding her forever to his empire of shadows. As the bitter weeks bleed into one another, Lily stands witness to the staggering violence of his hidden world. Yet, watch how her mind frantically rewrites the script. She wraps herself in the tragic illusion that she alone holds the key to his soul. She truly believes the gentle way he touches her hair somehow erases the blood on his hands. It is the final, fatal symptom of a captive heart, convinced that her pure love can cure his deep rot. But we all learn this the hard way eventually. Believing you possess the magic to heal a monster is often the exact delusion that allows the beast to finally swallow you whole. The camera pulls back to reveal a chillingly elegant wedding. 150 apex predators sit in silent judgment. Lily walks toward her doom, wearing her mother's delicate pearls, dragging the last fragile ghost of her innocence into this gilded hell. At the altar, she looks up into his dark eyes, tragically mistaking his raw territorial pride for genuine devotion. The vaulted ceilings echo as they exchange their sacred vows. When Lorenzo whispers his promise to cherish her, you can almost hear the vault of her mind locking shut forever. Let you and I hold on to this sobering truth. The most inescapable prisons in this world are almost never forged from cold steel and iron bars, but meticulously crafted from the most beautiful, breathtaking promises. The golden rings slip onto trembling fingers, and a terrifying peace settles deep into Lily's bones. She has surrendered to the undertow, choosing the electrifying danger of her captor over the quiet safety of a normal life. The priest speaks the ancient words, wrapping a holy sanction around an unholy bond. Lorenzo pulls her in, their kiss a violent collision of tenderness and absolute possession. It is the physical anchor of her ruin. They press their foreheads together, breathing the words, mine and yours, like an unbreakable blood pact. The innocent girl is gone, entirely consumed by the architect of her destruction. The lesson here is bleak. The most terrifying cages we will ever know are the ones we willingly build from our own darkest, corrupted desires. They turn and walk down the aisle as husband and wife, bathed in the warm, deceitful glow of the stained glass. Lily's mind has woven its final fatal masterpiece. She knows he is a monster, yet she quiets the screaming alarms in her blood by pretending they walk as equals. She paints her tragic fall from an independent woman to a syndicate queen as an epic romantic triumph, entirely blind to the invisible chains dragging behind her dress. The ultimate victory for a tyrant is not simply caging the bird, but convincing the bird it rules the sky. Think about that for a moment. You can never truly break free from a toxic grip as long as you are still finding beautiful, poetic ways to romanticize the very poison that is slowly stopping your heart.